Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Houston Sports Talk back into the video today. Into the Houston Texans announced their 53-man roster, and we're going to be going over what this 53-man roster looks like and the roster cuts that the Houston Texans made to get the roster down to 53. Let's get into it. So we're going to go position by position, starting off with quarterback, then going through the offense, and then we'll get to the defense. All right, starting off with the quarterback position, of course. Obviously, the Texans cut CJ. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, CJ Stroud's on the roster as starting quarterback, and his backup quarterback. For a minute, it looked like there was a little bit of controversy who was going to be the backup quarterback between Case Keenum and Davis Mills, but Davis Mills does win the backup quarterback job. They released Tim Boyle. And even though there was a little bit of a competition between Case Keenum and Davis Mills, Case Keenum is put on injured reserve and will be out for 3 to 4 months and most likely gone for the season due to a foot injury. So only 2 quarterbacks on the roster. The Texans have been making practice squad signings all day for the 17-man practice squad. They still have some spots left. They have not picked up a quarterback. I'm waiting for them to do that. I mean, hoping they do because God forbid in a game, CJ Stroud goes down. What if something happened to Davis Mills? What if you're going to have to be like the 49ers where you put Christian McCaffrey and Wildcat and you bring back in an injured quarterback like they did with Brock Purdy in that NFC Championship game? So hope the Texans, at least, bring someone on to the roster, another quarterback. And I'd hope it'd be Tim Boyle because Tim Boyle looked pretty good in the preseason for the Texans. Now let's get to the running back position. There are 5 running backs and fullbacks. Well, we'll see what happens. Joe Mixon, Damian Pierce, Cam Akers, Duran Gabaloway, British Brooks. Now, why I said we'll see what happens is because British Brooks is a running back, but I believe the Texans will use him as a fullback, put him in the fullback role. So now at the fullback and running back position, here are the players that the Texans released and waived. They waived Troy Harrison, J.J. Taylor, and Jawar Jordan, and they released Nick Bawden and Andrew Beck. A little upset about the Andrew Beck release because I thought he had a big role with this Texans team last year, but it is what it is. And then Troy Hairston and J.J. Taylor it's already been reported they're coming back on the practice squad. Jawar Jordan, he was waived, but he's injured. So if he goes unclaimed or doesn't get signed today, he will be back on the Texans roster on injured reserve. So, he's going to stay on this roster if no one picks him up today. The only one I'm really upset about the Texans letting go is Andrew Beck. That does upset me. But Troy Harrison and J.J. Taylor, as reported, are coming back to the Texans on the practice squad. At the wide receiver position, of course, you have Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, and Nico Collins making the roster. But here's where things got tricky. Who were going to get those final 3 spots? The Texans actually kept 7 wide receivers on the roster. Xavier Hutchinson, Robert Woods, and John Mechie III all made the roster. If you're wondering, how did all 3 of those guys make the roster when it was looking like at least 1 or 2 of them were possibly going to get cut? Well, the Texans ended up releasing Noah Brown, and Steven Sims makes the roster. I actually do not mind Steven Sims making the roster at all, to be honest with you guys. Steven Sims is a big part to the Houston Texans on special teams. And if you ask me, I believe Steven Sims was a guy for this Houston Texans team that was not going to make it through waivers. He would have definitely been picked up with the punt return touchdown he had last year in the postseason against the Ravens. It was a huge punt return. Texans wouldn't even have a touchdown in that game if it wasn't for him. I know they lost that game. It's not like they won the divisional round because of him, but that's a huge play right there. It's one of the best plays of the year right there for the Houston Texans. And you need a guy who can do that kind of stuff on special teams. And he was good all year for the Texans on kicking punt returns. And he's not just a guy who's a good special teams guy. You can use him in whether it's handing the ball off to him or throwing him the football. He's a good extra guy. I mean, just in the last final preseason game, they handed the ball off to him. He had a 38-yard run. So he's capable of doing good things for this offense, but I think the big reason why you couldn't let him go was just because of the fact that I didn't think he was going to come out of waivers. I thought he would definitely get picked up for what he does on special teams and other things. But they ended up waiving Quintez Cephas, Johnny Johnson III, who is coming back on the practice squad, and Ben Skoranek. and then they released Noah Brown. Look, I'm not happy about Noah Brown being released, but this guy has not been healthy. Yes, has he been a beast when playing for the Texans? We know he was so dominant against the Buccaneers. He was so dominant against the Cincinnati Bengals, but he's not been healthy. He missed 7 games for the Houston Texans in the regular season. He has not been healthy all training camp or all preseason. He has not been healthy at all. But Robert Woods on the other end is a guy that's been healthy. Same thing goes for Xavier Hutchinson. Same thing goes for John Mechie. All 3 of these guys have been playing good throughout training camp and preseason and have been healthy, while you compare to Noah Brown. Yes, he's been a monster for the Houston Texans, when he's on the field, but he can't stay healthy for them. And I know it's just last season, but it's carried over to this season as well in training camp and preseason. And it's 1 o'clock today. The 53, he was cut yesterday. It's 1 o'clock today on Wednesday, and he has still not been picked up because of the injuries. So a little surprised that he hasn't been picked up yet, but I think a big reason is because of the injuries we see him have. And to be completely honest, I'd rather have 4 wide receivers like Xavier Hutchinson, Robert Woods, John Mechie, and Steven Sims, who I know are going to completely stay healthy for the Houston Texans, compared to Noah Brown, who has not done that. Robert Woods has been, I wouldn't say just as good as Noah Brown, but he's been good like Noah Brown has been. Robert Woods almost had 500 receiving yards last season with the Houston Texans. He played a good role with this Houston Texans team. If you look at it in the first 3 games last year, that was one of C.J. Stroud's favorite targets. In the first 2 games, C.J. Stroud, outside of Nico Collins, in the first 2 games against the Ravens and the Colts, and even the Jacksonville Jaguars, outside of Nico Collins, the next guy that C.J. Stroud loved to throw the ball to early on in the first 3 weeks of the season was Robert Woods. So I'd rather have a healthy Robert Woods than a not healthy Noah Brown. And then the same thing goes for Xavier Hutchinson and John Mechie. And the only reason I think Steven Sims is making this roster is because of what he brings to the table on special teams, and I think the Texans need that. All right, on the tight end room, Dalton Schultz is of course making this roster, so is Brevin Jordan and 4th-round pick Cade Stover. They waived Tegan Quintanar, who's injured. I like Quintariano, but he cannot stay healthy. It's another issue, just like Noah Brown. All right, offensive line, 9 offensive linemen made the roster. Of course, you have your starters, Laramie Tunsil, Titus Howard, Shaq Mason, and also Juice Scruggs and Kendrick Green, Blake Fisher. I'll just give the full list again. Laramie Tunsil, Titus Howard, Shaq Mason, Kenyon Green, Blake Fisher, Kendrick Green, Nick Broker, Juice Scruggs, Jarrett Patterson. I tried to list the starters because I thought this was in order of what the starters will be, but it wasn't. But yeah, Nick Broker makes the roster. Jarrett Patterson, he was a guy I liked last year. He makes the roster. I thought those were 2 guys that had to, kind of fight for, their roster spots. Not a big fan of Kendrick Green. I'll see what he does. He's not one of my favorites. I'm really excited to see what Kenyon Green does this year healthy. Really love the draft pick in the 2nd round, Blake Fisher. He's going to be a stud. So I don't mind this offensive line room. The Texans ended up waiving Dieter Iceland and Killian Zaire, and they released Cameron Irving, Charlie Heck, Chris Reed, and David Sharp. All right, defensive line carries 8 defensive linemen: Mario Edwards Jr., Foley Futukasi, Daniel Hunter, Derek Barnett, Will Anderson Jr. It also has Jerry Hughes, the veteran who there was a little bit, just a tiny bit of question if he was going to make this roster or not, but he makes it. Khalil Davis and Tim Settle also make the roster. They waived McTelvin Ajim, Solomon Byrd, who's going to be picked up to the practice squad, Malik Fisher, Ali Gay, who was just picked up by the tight ends, Marcus Harris, and Phidarius Payne, who's injured. And Curtis Heinisch was placed on injured reserve. Also, keep in mind, Dylan Horton is still sick, and Danico Autry is suspended for the first 6 games of the season. All right, linebackers, you have Henry Tuoto'o, Aziz Al-Shahir, Delshon Phillips, Jake Hansen, Neville Hewitt, and Jamal Hill. Waived Tariq Barnes, Max Tooley, and Jacob Phillips was released. Keep in mind, Christian Harris was placed on IR for just the first 4 games of the season. All right, defensive backs, 10 defensive backs on the roster: Derek Stingley Jr., Jeff Okudah, Kamari Lassiter, Miles Bryant, Jimmy Ward, Kalen Bullock, Jalen Petrie, Eric Murray, Chris Boyd makes the roster, really like him, and MJ Stewart. While Troy Pride was waived and the following players were released: Mike Ford, C.J. Henderson, Lonnie Johnson Jr., Desmond King II, and D'Angelo Ross. Now, Mike Ford returned to his former team, the Cleveland Browns, and Lonnie Johnson Jr. joined the Carolina Panthers. On special teams, as expected, punter Tommy Townsend. He's going to be great for us this year. And then Kaimi Fairbairn, the kicker, and John Weeks, the long snapper, and the longest tenured Houston Texan. Let me know your thoughts on the Houston Texans 53-man roster announcement in the comment section, and peace out. Go Texans.